This is the Deep Dive Podcast. And here is your host, Michael Coles.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Deep Dive Podcast. Thank you for joining us on our journey, where we interview one guest in each episode, talking about one subject that the guest is very passionate about. Today's episode is titled Being a NeuroSpicy Boss and Running a Successful Neurodivergent Company with Neurodivergent People. Ashley Ray will join us in a moment, but if you'd like to be a guest or to check out show notes and upcoming episodes, go to www.deepdiveau.net or link to our socials on TikTok and Instagram at the Deep Dive AU. Guest on the Deep Dive. It's Ashley Ray, creator and managing director of AR Services Group. Her group does virtual support coordination to clients right around Australia and has a team of NeuroSpicy workers with lived experience that can truly understand the challenges of its clients. The company has recently expanded to provide psychosocial recovery coaching for their clients. Ashley has a huge following on her TikTok and is passionate about the NDIS and is a big believer of supporting other neurodivergents with a blend of social justice. Ashley Ray, welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and doing this with you. It's very cool.
Well, this is the first episode, so hopefully there'll be many more. So firstly, in your own words, what is the definition of NeuroSpicy?
I mean, everyone really likes their own terminology and how they identify with it. I like the term NeuroSpicy, and that's what I used to really identify with. I now identify as NeuroSparkly because anyone who's met me in person will know I have a huge attraction to sparkly gold metallic things. I'm like a bit of a magpie and a dragon, but really it's a little bit of playfulness around recognizing neurodivergence and that we are a little bit different and we operate differently, and that's okay. It's just you're allowed to have fun with that.
Yeah, fantastic. So going back to when you created your business, when was it actually created, by the way?
So it actually started just as me as a sole trader in my spare bedroom in my tiny home. And it started in kind of like this vacuum of, my husband was an NDIS participant and I had a lot of family members and friends and loved ones who were on it. And we were kind of having the same conversations all the time. And I was like, but it's not hard. How, like what? Like I learned from my loved ones for a long time before I ever got into this around NDIS and disability, and it's always an ongoing learning. I wish I could know everything, but I never will. And it started really in August of 2022, just me going, I think I'm going to try this and we'll just see how this goes. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's okay. I will delete all evidence. When you're like, okay, I've embarrassed myself on social media, we can hide the evidence of that. But actually it just snowballed. It grew really quickly. And it's just expanded from there.
I tell you what, the NDIS businesses that you've created is so needed within the community, and that's correct.
Yeah, it came really from the fact that my husband is neurodivergent, and I was starting to explore that stuff for myself personally. But then I looked around and noticed and this is commonly kind of known now, but at the time it wasn't, which is that we run in packs. We all vibe together, we hang out together. And I looked around and realized all of my friends had, ADHD or autism or both. And, it was, oh, okay, maybe that's a thing for me. And then realizing so many services were targeted towards kids, and that's absolutely necessary and needed. I'm not here to say that we shouldn't have them, but there was nothing that looked at supporting adults who have adult lives and responsibilities and needs that actually respected that part of them and looked at them holistically and wasn't infantilizing.
And it's so needed within the community because there's I've been calling out for these services for about 10 years, and basically the services are just really coming out now.
Yeah, and even then, look, it's not a perfect system. Those services still have to work with a very broken and very chaotic system. So that is a huge barrier, but amongst the many others. But it's I'm really happy to see more coming out that is actually supporting adults. Even with any kind of disability, and loads of different age ranges and specialties as well, because there's a lot of underserved communities. It's not just about the late diagnosed neurodivergent person. There's a lot that focuses heavily on kids and frequently leaves behind adults, especially if you have any other kind of intersectionality going on.
That's right. So what actually came first, the TikTok or the business? Can you actually sort of explain how you created
The TikTok definitely came first. I'm in Victoria, and I got onto TikTok like pretty much everyone on the East Coast did when the great panini, I call it that because I find it very difficult to actually talk about that period of like 2020 and 2021 because of just what we went through as a state, and personally what that was like for me. Literally we're in lockdown for months and months. We're not allowed to leave our houses. And, for a lot of neurodivergent folk, we're like, oh, this is heaven. But when you live the reality and that choice is taken away from you, it's very different. Like we got through it. We're all still here and we're okay. But it's a very traumatic period for a lot of different reasons, and very scary. And you do what you can to distract yourself during that period because you're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to like go out unless you need groceries, right? Or it's a medical appointment. So I was on TikTok a lot. That's how I got onto it. I wasn't planning to, but what else are you going to do with your time?
Exactly, because I think there was when I first actually started my TikTok, or when I first actually went onto TikTok, this is before I actually started my channel, is basically sort of like, there was all these sort of like, unique sort of jokes and all that type of thing. And then sort of like, there was a lot of autistic creators, which actually sort of like, found on TikTok as well, including yours. So it's actually sort of really good to actually sort of connect to these other TikTokers.
Yeah, 100%. And that's kind of how it went for me. I got onto TikTok, had no idea what it was, didn't understand it. It felt very much like I was way too old to be on there to start with, because I was like, oh, does this contraption work? But I learned and I watched and I met some amazing people that have completely changed how I think about a lot of different things, or have added to like bits of knowledge. And so, like, I've just learned so much. And it's also the place where I was able to feel really supported by a community of people who felt and noticed things about themselves the same way that I did, like that we just didn't fit in, or explaining about things like I had no idea what PMDD was. I didn't understand what was going on with me. I knew that I was different, but I didn't realize about the differences between boys and girls or whatever when it comes to diagnosing ASD and ADHD. And then it was just this explosion of information that made me really look at my life in a very different way.
So with your group, how did you actually sort of gain your team of neurodivergent experts? Because I'd really like to know about that.
Look, trial and error. Like I do my best to make sure that the team that we hire, like I hire specifically from the disabled community. Something that's been really important to me is that we support our own success. So services, I think, as much as possible, should be delivered or provided by people within the community, because employment is a massive barrier. So literally I put the call out. TikTok is, obviously the platform I'm most active on. So I will often, when we're hiring, put something on there to say, hey, we're hiring, this is what we're looking for. Our website has a lot more detailed information about what we look for. And we kind of we wait for people to apply. Sometimes people send me a DM to ask more questions, and we have an interview process as well. But again, it's really important to me that everyone who works in my company I'm not going to share who's got what, because that's private personal information, but
yeah, well, that's fair enough. Fair enough. But you've got a team that says that's backing you up.
Yeah, you've got to have some form of lived experience in and around chronic health, disability, especially when it comes to being neurodivergent and the issues and barriers. And like just being, you might have disabilities, but maybe it's not ASD, maybe it's just ADHD, or maybe it's more psychosocial stuff. that's fine, because you're going to be aware of a lot of the same barriers. Like there's a lot of those barriers and stuff and issues are still going to apply.
Yep. I've heard that your team members have your back in terms of supporting each other, and they each have their unique skills and abilities, so to speak. Can you describe for me their unique skills and how they can support other staff and participants of your service?
Yeah, so this is another element that is really important to me, was to have a diverse team in terms of what they bring to the table, because no one is an island, and they shouldn't be, because I think what we've all seen happen with loads of different companies in different sectors, but particularly in human services and community services, when people are isolated, when they don't have help and support, they burn out really hard and really fast. And that's when you end up with a huge turnover of staff. It ends up costing the organization a huge amount of money, but it also means that the clients or participants aren't getting continuity of care necessarily, or it's very, like, it's not as personal, it's not as tailored, like it ends up becoming more of like a brick in the wall situation, and we don't want that. So I like to have a variety of different skills and specialties within the team. So for example, like we have a team member who's got a lot of experience with adult education and supporting adult education, particularly adults with any kind of disability, in terms of navigating, TAFEs and universities. And that's not just about getting a learning access plan. It's about helping them to meet their course requirements, so assessments, coursework, so helping them to like even understand the requirements of an assessment, for example, or helping them practice a role play or a presentation, and working with them and what their disabilities, I guess like the limitations of that, but also where their strengths are, to help them, ultimately successfully, in theory, successfully pass everything and be able to celebrate, that they've achieved a qualification. We also have within our team as well, we've got people who've got quite a lot of experience working in mental health, so particularly like alcohol and other drugs, different kinds of supports there, and also mental health counseling. Like there's a lot there, and not that we necessarily draw on alcohol and other drug stuff, like specific things out of that, because that's not generally the cohort of humans that we work with, but there's skills and there's like things that we can pull out of there that you just never know when it's going to come in useful. I hope that helps. We've got I'm always like surprised as well, because sometimes people in my team, not looking at anyone in particular, but you know who you are, who just regularly like forget or undersell themselves on what they are really good at and what they're talented at. And even me, like I have to remind them, like, hang on, you've got this, like, you've done this, it's okay, like, let's rock this.
Oh, thanks for that. Now, what are the challenges that your business and participants are actually facing at the moment?
Just one?
Well, you can detail as many as you like. So.
Look, navigating the landscape of NDIS at the moment is a nightmare for everyone, and it's not just my company, it's not just the participants that we work with, it's nationwide. For anyone who is connected to NDIS, whether you're a participant, provider, or you're somewhat adjacent to that, it's a very chaotic landscape at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty. Something we're finding, really difficult is that there's a lack of clear information that is available and accessible and consistent. And that is information directly from NDIS about, for example, with the rollout of PACE, it was very, very difficult to get information about what we needed to do, what any organization was going to need to do to adapt to that system. There was just nothing available. There was no web page for it. There were no emails. It took months to get information, and yet we were getting participants being moved onto the system, but none of us knew what it meant. We didn't understand all these new funding categories. There's lots of issues there. There is now a web page 6 months later. Actually, it's more like 9 months later, but that didn't exist until very recently. And And so that's been really chaotic because obviously we want to, our role as coordinators is to help people understand their plans. And how can you do that when you're given a system where there's no information? And, we'd contact NDIS often to get information, but the information again, we'd be told different things by different contact center staff, and none of it ever made sense. And it seems now to be settling down somewhat and be a little bit clearer and more consistent, but we've just had like a relentless 9 months of no information.
So I think sort of having the important information with the NDIS, I think, is crucial to getting the best support for the participants.
100%.
Now, changing tact a little bit, can you tell me some of the success stories that you and your business have experienced since you've opened AR Services Group?
Yeah, I want to share that, like, I don't define success necessarily by a financial figure, like, oh, we were this profitable or what have you. That's not how I look at it. Success for me is, first of all, my staff are happy and they're not burning out. They feel supported. They feel strong in what we're doing, and they're really, I guess, dedicated. Like, they're not burning out. They're happy to be here. They're happy to be doing this work. It still feels meaningful to them. They're not in compassion fatigue, and they feel supported to, I guess, like, participate in different activities of like professional development. Like, they know that we'll be there and help them with that as much as we can. The next thing for me is, what are our participant journeys like? So that might sound a little bit cheesy to say participant journey, but going, where were our clients at when we started working with them versus where they are at 6 months down the track? Or success is not necessarily, oh, we've been this profitable, but what we can see is a change in the person. We can see that someone is more confident than they were when we started with them, and that they're actually, we work, again, being neurodivergent, phone calls are absolutely terrifying for so many of us, right? But if we are working with someone who is suddenly, like, after a period of working with us, they start to feel comfortable enough to make a phone call, that's a huge win and a celebration. And it might be to book a doctor's appointment. It might be to call their plan manager. It might be just to ring a family member to say hello. Those things, for me, that's success. If we can get people to feel comfortable and confident to do a little bit more independently, if that's possible for them.
Yep. And we can and then you guys can actually sort of support them through their journey. So I'm really sort of glad you're actually doing that. So how do you imagine actually AR Services Group being in a few years' time? So what's your plans for the future?
I wish I knew. Truth be told, I don't know 100% how things are going to play out, because, again, we're in a period of time where the government has said there are going to be significant changes to the NDIS, and we don't know what that is going to actually translate to in terms of day-to-day operations for providers. So a big example there is, we don't know if we're going to be required to be all registered organizations, and if that is going to happen, what support the government will provide to providers in order to do that, because it is a very expensive process and very time consuming. And so it's kind of going to depend a little bit on what the government does, because we have to be able to adapt to it. So I do have some general plans. What I would love to be able to do is be able to continue expanding a little bit with our psychosocial recovery coaching and support coordination. But I'm also, I guess, like, I'm also launching like my own individual stuff shortly, where I wanted to be able to do stuff that was for our whole community of neurodivergent humans, not just those who access NDIS.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is very crucial.
Exactly. And, like, look, it's not to shut out anyone who's on NDIS, but it's to be a little bit more inclusive, and also a little bit more freedom to do things where it's not necessarily subject to the same scrutiny if you're an NDIS provider. So there's a little bit more freedom to have fun and be creative, which my ADHD brain absolutely needs.
Yes. And the ADHD does actually sort of need creativity and basically sort of some impulsivity and stuff like that to a degree as well.
Exactly. Like I've got this big bold dream where I do want to be able to run events for our community that are just not there. And I know that we have a lot of barriers getting in the way for like wanting to do certain things because peopling is exhausting. But then there are some things where I'm like, there's need here. Like our community needs things that are appropriate. Like don't just take us bowling like as an activity, as a group activity. Like for some people that will absolutely be fine. But what I want to be able to do is have events and things that are actually adult appropriate, as if like, you know, we are adults, we have adult interests. Being able to connect with each other and facilitate those really beautiful friendships. And I will say, I think friendships between neurodivergent people are incredibly special and wonderful because they're often really transparent. You don't.
And they sort of can be completely honest and just upfront, which is, I think, it's very nice to see because in this process, which I'm actually going through, I've met a lot of neurodivergent people, which I think is really beautiful to actually see. And we have a great neurodivergent community, so I think it's wonderful to have that community involved because I think we need it more than
And
ever.
I want to be able to see the outcomes for our community as a whole change. I don't love the fact that there's a pretty well-known statistic out there, and for the life of me, I cannot remember where it comes from, but the statistic that like 85% of neurodivergent people don't work, which to me is like, cool. So we're either relying on our family to house and cover our expenses, or we're on income support from the government. We're on job seeker, most of us, because getting onto DSP is so hard and there are so many limitations, or we're underemployed. And for me, I'm like, that's horrible. Like a lot of us, we are extraordinarily gifted and do so well at a specific thing. And I find it a real shame that a lot of places won't hire people who are neurodivergent because they just go, all the vibes a bit weird. When it's like, you have no idea how incredible an asset that person would be for your business or your team. Like, yes, you might have to make some accommodations, but accommodations for us are not a big deal. Like they're often very low cost or free.
Yeah. And everybody on the neurodivergent or the autism spectrum actually deserves some sort of accommodations and stuff like that too. You can get the best out of them that way.
Exactly. And they're not huge. It might mean that you've got to, you know, I think if you're in a position of leadership within a company and you're deciding whether or not to hire someone, you get someone who's neurodivergent. First of all, if they're willing to tell you that they are neurodivergent, respect that they feel safe enough and comfortable enough to tell you that, and ask them what they would need to, you know, if you get to the point where you're about to offer them the job, have that discussion with them about if they have accommodations. Don't be afraid. Ask, like, accommodations are not a bad thing. You may just have to tailor how you interact with them a little bit more. You might have to just be that much more transparent and clear with your directions and instructions for things. But that benefits everyone in the department or the team or the business because there's no room for error there. You've been very, very clear. So it's not like there's a reason for things to, like, I mean, human error happens, but it's not like you haven't been clear with everyone. Like, it benefits everyone.
But sort of having that transparency rather than sort of like finding out later on the piece is actually quite beneficial because you can get the best out of your team that way.
Exactly. And if you're an organization that has to be regularly audited for whatever reason, like if you provide financial services or, you know, maybe you do work in healthcare, etc., that level of transparency supports your compliance.
And it's very helpful as well. So last question, and probably the most important question. If you're thinking of starting a neurodivergent business yourself and are wanting to employ NeuroSpicy people, what advice would you give them?
There's a lot. I have a lot to say on this. So the first one would be about understanding, at least to some extent, what your own support needs are. So one of the reasons that my company operates entirely virtual is because I am then able to curate my own sensory environment so that I can actually engage in work. Because I don't operate in a normal office space. Like, it's too noisy, too much stimulation, and just it doesn't work. I will have meltdowns almost on a daily basis. So understand what your sensory needs are, and that comes down to everything from how if you are wanting to work from home, for example, like, look at your computer setup. I'm not saying you've got to get OH&S in to do it, but have a look at like what the accessibility settings on your systems are, the lighting situation in the space that you want to be in. Is it set up? Is it pretty? Like, does it look inviting for you? Have some really clear boundaries about your work as well. So how you want to engage with it. For me, I have a whole room in my home that is dedicated for work only. Nothing else happens in this space. I can close the door at whatever time I choose to knock off work for the day, and that's it. Work stays in that room, nothing else. So yeah, having that stuff. I also am a big fan of stealth fidgets, which are the ones that don't look like fidgets. So if you need to have them with you, and I guess depending what kind of business you want to start and your own comfortability, you can disclose whether or not you have disabilities in like an email signature, and just being, saying, hey, just be aware, like, I have some disabilities. It might take me a little bit longer to respond, etc. I have that on my personal email signature, which is not my work one, but it's like, hey, just be aware, like, I'm a little bit blind. You're probably going to see some spelling mistakes and it might take me a while to read and get back to you. In terms of hiring people who are neurodivergent, talk with them about what their needs are. Chances are you probably won't have to do loads to accommodate, because you're probably going to be needing the same stuff, or there's going to be a bit of overlap between what you both need, and how the business is set up. But have that discussion. And something for me that has worked really well is just reminding the team and letting them know, if you want me to have a chat with anyone that's in like their care team, for example, like if they have an OT or a therapist of some description who, can have that discussion with me about their access needs, etc., I'm so more than happy to do that. And just being really clear, just check in and talk. I would say something else that's really important. Sorry, I have a lot here, but figure out what's going to happen when capacity drops. When, our capacities fluctuate. Life also happens that affects our capacity. But figure out what the plan's going to be when your own capacity or a team member's capacity drops. Have some kind of contingency in place if you can.
Yeah, because support needs do change over time, and also sort of like, care needs may change all over time depending on when you get older. Your care needs may be more, or you sort of like, if you're a child, your care needs are very different to an adult. So yeah, so it's very useful.
Exactly. But having said all that, it might sound really scary. Do it. Have fun. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You can close it down and try something else.
Yep. Well, fantastic having you on the podcast, Ashley Ray. Thank you so much for being a part of our first episode. And thank you we'll hopefully have you in later episodes. We can talk about something else.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to listen.
If you want more information about Ashley Ray, you can go to her website, ashleyray.com, or you can follow her on TikTok at Feminist Radical, or AI Disability Services on Instagram. We'll see you next time.